What's up? Austin here, and I'm a wildlife and nature photographer. I've traveled across the country for the past 2 years taking photos as a hobby. Right when I wanted to take my work seriously for an income, disaster struck. I spent the better part of 2023 honing my skills in a constant state of what if. Not what if my work was good enough, but what if I was going to go to prison. The good news is that I'm not going to go to prison, but my schedule is now packed with court-mandated obligations that, if I don't adhere to, I could end up in prison anyway. I also had my driver's license taken away, which makes getting to those court-mandated obligations and photography spots just that much harder. So let me tell you what happened as I build this. So it started off as pretty much any normal day for me. I just went to work, but after work I was going to go to one of my coworkers' friends' house parties because they were just releasing a new album. So that was like their album release show. So after work I ended up going over my coworker's house just to hang out until the show. We ended up going to the show. It was probably about like 3 or 4 hours. We had some pizza, we were just hanging out before it. Then we ended up going to the show. I had a couple of beers and I got stuck outside talking to a lot of people, so I didn't even really see the show. But then my coworker got me and we were going over to a bowling alley after, which he's a part of. And admittedly, I shouldn't have even driven over there. At that point, I was quite intoxicated, but it is what it is at this point. I ended up going to the bowling alley. I had a beer while I was bowling with them, and then I ended up wanting to go get a second one. When I went to go get a second beer, I got stuck talking to people at the bar. By the time I got back to the bowling lane, my friends had left. They were somewhere else. I didn't know where they were. There was just a bunch of girls in the lane now, so I just figured, alright, I'm just gonna sit down, watch, and then hopefully they'll come over and find me. After a little bit of just waiting, I had to go to the bathroom, so I ended up leaving my beer at the lane. On my way back from the bathroom, I realized what time it was, so I went back to my seat and someone had taken my seat, so I sat next to them and took 2 sips of my beer before I decided to leave. My friend ended up calling me right as I was backing out of my parking spot. I told him I was leaving. He told me, alright, cool, see you Monday, just let me know when you get home. The only thing that I remember was after I hung up with him, I took about 3 turns out of the parking lot and everything was black until the next thing that I remember was about 6 cop cars behind me. I pulled over and was immediately ripped from my car and thrown on the ground with handcuffs shortly after. I spent the next 12 hours in a holding cell where I was told what had happened because I had no idea. They had found me sleeping on the shoulder. I was unresponsive to them until I woke up and then just decided to drive off. I was speeding at around 85 miles, swerving across all 3 lanes of the highway. I had sideswiped somebody and I hit the guardrails multiple times. Eventually they had a cop in front of me that slowed me to a stop in the middle of the highway, and when the 2 officers got out and tried to approach my vehicle, I decided to take off and apparently hit the cop car and one of the officers. Shortly after me driving around them again is when I came to and I decided to stop. So I had just taken the cops on a 15-mile ride, which I had no consciousness about. And same thing with the hour-long ride that it took me to get to where they first found me. After being in a holding cell, I was brought to jail where I spent 5 days. I had to wait 2 days before I could even see a judge since I had gotten in on a Saturday morning. And courts aren't open on the weekend, so I couldn't see a judge until Monday. When I had my hearing, it was virtual, and I was to stay an extra 3 days because that's what the cops wanted. Then I got to see a judge in person, and I found out if I was going to be released or not. with all of the incidents that I had, I should have been kept in jail until my case was finished, but I was getting fingerprinted by the forensic scientist at the time, and she told me that the cops hadn't filled out the paperwork properly, so I was going to get released. I finally saw the judge in person, and he told me that it's one hell of a way to start a record, but since I didn't have any prior record, that I was to be released. I'm sure that's also because of the paperwork not being filled out properly, but he didn't really say that, so I wasn't going to bring it up. After I saw the judge, I spent another 9 hours in the jail cell because someone had messed up the paperwork and marked off that I was supposed to stay. I had finally gotten out at around 6 p.m. My mother had picked me up, and I was finally able to tell her and the rest of my family what had happened fully. After a good meal and a nice shower, I called my best friend and told her everything. I had spent those 5 days thinking I had been extremely drunk somehow, but she told me it sounded like I was roofied. As soon as she said that it was probably me being roofied, I broke down into tears and my body just couldn't stop shaking for about 5 minutes. That's when I knew it wasn't just because of drinking. When we hung up, I had contacted another friend of mine who was roofied to ask him more questions about it. He just further confirmed that's what happened. A couple days after, I met up with him and talked about what happened more over some drinks. When I say some, I mean we drank more than what I had that night in shorter period of time. So I did this to prove to myself it wasn't just the drinking and that it was some other sort of drug that I actually had done that to me, because I remember that night a lot clearer than completely blacking out. Anyway, I was out of jail and I was happy but still petrified. I had 16 and a half years in prison looming over my head. I tried my best to forget about it since I couldn't really do anything until I got a new court date. I traveled partially because it was something I enjoyed and kept my mind off of everything legally, but also slightly out of fear that I'd be locked up for about 16 years or so. My arrest was on February 25th of 2023. My next court hearing wasn't until September that same year. My case was finally closed on December 18th, 2023. Obviously, I'm not behind bars, so what I did end up getting sentenced to is drug court. So what is recovery court? Recovery court is something that if you had alcohol, drugs, something in your system, you can kind of say that those were the leading causes of why you did what you did. I was lucky enough that I had alcohol in my system still, because I found out later that apparently I had taken beers home from the party and apparently I drank them while I was blacked out. So I also got a DUI thrown in with all of my other charges. They also have to do an evaluation about the sort of drugs that you've done, the history that you've had, your home life, just a kind of background check just to make sure that you actually qualify for it. I did, just partially because of the alcohol in my system at the time, but I had also been quite a heavy drinker back in the days when I was in a band, probably about 3 years prior. After getting in recovery court, they explain everything that you have to do to stay in recovery court. And for me, it is go to IOP, which is an intensive outpatient program. I have to go for 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, and then an extra hour on Saturdays for about 4 months. I have to go to 3 AA meetings a week, and every morning you have to call the court and put in an extension number just to see if you get a random drug test that day. You have to stay employed, and this lasts for about 5 years, but as short as 1.5 years if you're on good behavior. So I currently work 2 jobs, one at QuickCheck, one at a music store. For those who don't know, QuickChek is pretty much the same thing as a Sheetz, Wawa, or 7-Eleven. It's definitely not my ideal job, but it is all that I could get close to my house, where I don't need to drive. It's also definitely a humbling job and tests my patience at times. I work at the cash register and help stock mostly, but I also help out in the deli as much as needed. Most of the time, I'm just in the cooler stocking drinks. And it's really easy to just say I prefer my other job for a slew of reasons, but it's just doesn't offer as many hours that I would need to earn enough to pay off all these court fines. I've had my job at the music store since I graduated high school 8 years ago. I started out organizing paperwork for school rentals and tuning stringed instruments like violins and violas, getting them ready. As things died down from the rental season, I spent a lot of my time in the back of the shop learning how to fix mainly guitars and some other stringed instruments like upright basses and cellos and violas as well. While I was doing that, I would also talk and watch one repairman work on flutes and other woodwind instruments. He taught me some of the basics, and my boss saw that I was doing well with that, so he asked if I wanted to go get some more training for all the other instruments. He talked to the rental company that we get all the instruments from and set up 3 days where I'd actually drive over there and learn specific things about instruments. Day 1 was a clarinet, the second day was on a flute, and the third day was learning about the saxophone. After that, I was helping a lot more with wind instruments and eventually became the repair guy at the store. It's been like that for the past 6 years or so. The reason I stay is because it's a relaxing job where I can work at my own pace and where my boss understands that I will do the best to get things done in a time frame that he needs. I only work there a couple of hours a week right now with everything going on, but sometimes it's just enough to break the monotony of everything else. Living in New Jersey my whole life had made me think that there isn't any wildlife or good views to take photos of in this state. I'd always thought that I needed to travel to make really good photos. Now I'm stuck here more or less, but that isn't going to stop me from trying to be the best photographer that I can be. So I'm making this channel to show my process and my progress as I challenge myself to take different styles of photos and change my perception of wildlife in my home state. I hope you stick around and follow me through one of my biggest challenges as I continue to prepare for the day that I can actually go and explore the country once again.